They say the worst thing a woman can do in the kingdom of Ashenfall is remember. Not grief, not treason, not even witchcraft. Remembering. Because in Ashenfall, memory is the one thing the crown cannot control, and the one thing that will get you killed faster than a blade through the chest. I know this because I watched them take my mother's memories from her, stripped them out like thread from cloth, until she sat in her chair by the window and smiled at strangers who called themselves her children. She forgot my name first, then my face, then the sound of my voice. By the end, she forgot she was even afraid. I never forgot a single thing. My name is Zara Osei. I am 24 years old, and I have spent 12 of those years watching the kingdom of Ashenfall slowly eat itself alive, one stolen mind at a time. And in the morning they came for me, I was not standing in a market. I was not fetching water from the river. I was not doing anything that a girl worth noticing would do. I was crouched in the archive room beneath the old temple, reading documents that were supposed to have been burned 3 decades ago. Documents that proved the Black Moon King had not merely inherited his throne, he had murdered everyone who stood between him and it, including, it turns out, my father. The knock at the archive door came soft, polite even, the kind of knock that means, we already have men surrounding the building. I knew the sound because I had heard it twice before in my life, once at our home the night my father disappeared, once at the hospital in the morning they came to erase my mother. I stood, I tucked the documents into my chest wrapping, I walked to the door. I opened it. The soldier on the other side wore the silver and black of the palace guard. His helmet bore the crescent sigil, the mark of the Black Moon Court. Behind him stood 3 others, and behind them, stretching the length of the narrow lane, more guards than I had ever seen assigned to a single arrest. All of them, for one girl in a basement. He cleared his throat. Zara Osei? I looked him straight in the eyes. You have the wrong woman. He looked at the list in his hand. He looked at my face. He looked at the list again. You've been selected, he said. And that is when I realized something that made my blood run cold, not with fear, but with the particular chill of a truth clicking into place like the final piece of a puzzle you didn't know you were solving. They hadn't come to arrest me. They had come to marry me to the man who killed my father.
The carriage smelled of cedarwood and old fear. I noticed the fear first. It lived in the cushion fabric, worked deep into the threading, the particular sourness of someone who had sat in the seat before me and sweated through their clothes in absolute terror. Whoever she was, she had gripped the door handle hard enough to leave fingernail marks in the wood. I ran my thumb across those marks and felt something close to solidarity. Then I noticed the cedarwood, fresh, deliberate, sprayed to cover the fear. That detail told me more about the crown than 100 documents. They knew what this carriage meant to the women inside it. They just didn't care. Outside, the city of Ashenfall passed in glimpses through the iron-barred window. The lower wards where children played in the gray dust. The merchant quarter where men argued prices and women balanced loads, and everyone pretended nothing unusual was happening. The mid-city square where a vendor selling groundnuts watched the palace carriage pass and immediately looked at the ground, the way a man looks at the ground when he has learned that curiosity is expensive. I kept my face still and watched all of it, memorizing it the way my mother had taught me to memorize everything, before they took that from her too. Look at a thing like you will never see it again, she used to say, because one day you won't. The Black Moon Palace rose from the eastern cliffs the way a sickness rises from the throat, slow, inevitable, and by the time you saw it, already inside you. Black stone towers carved from the mountain itself, curved up atop like crescent moons or cupped hands, depending on whether you were the kind of person who believed in hope. The outer walls were inlaid with dark silver that caught no light, only absorbed it, so that the whole structure seemed to dim the sky around it rather than reflect it. My mother had described it to me once, back when she still could. It looks like the sky swallowed something it couldn't digest. I had thought she was being poetic. I understood now that she had been being precise. The carriage stopped. The doors opened. I stepped out and breathed the mountain air, thinner here, colder, tasting of iron and pine. The courtyard was vast and perfectly ordered, its black stone tiles swept to a shine. Guards stood at every pillar, faces obscured behind crescent-marked visors. At the far end, wide stairs rose to carved iron doors standing open like a waiting mouth. No one welcomed me, no one needed to. The architecture did it for them. A woman appeared at my side, not a guard, but a keeper. That was the palace word for them, keepers of the selected. She was perhaps 50, with silver hair swept tightly back and the carefully neutral expression of someone who had learned long ago to not have expressions. "I am Nadia," she said. "I will take you to your rooms. You are expected to rest tonight." Expected by whom? She paused, the briefest hesitation. By the king, of course. And when do I meet him? When he decides. She walked. I followed. I counted doorways, stairwells, guard rotations. I noted which corridors were lit and which were dim. I catalogued the location of every window wide enough for a body to pass through. Old habit, my father's habit, inherited. My rooms were in the east tower, 3 connected chambers overlooking the inner courtyard. Clean, cold, decorated in the palace's unvarying palette of black and silver. A fire burned in the hearth that no one had asked me if I wanted. A tray of food sat on a carved table that I did not touch. The documents pressed against my ribs beneath my wrapping, still dry, still intact. I sat on the bed and thought carefully about what I knew. The selection was how the Black Moon King chose his consort, supposedly a great honor, supposedly based on the court seer's divine guidance, supposedly the most sacred tradition in the kingdom's history. What it actually was, every person outside the palace walls knew, and no one inside would say. A death sentence with good furniture. 11 women had been selected in the last 12 years, 1 per year, always in winter, always under the black moon. None had ever been seen again. No bodies were produced, no funerals were held. The palace simply announced that the selected had completed her sacred duty and that the king was in mourning. 11 women, 12 years. The king had been mourning for a long time. What I could not understand, what gnawed at me through a sleepless night as the fire burned low and the mountain wind pressed at the windows, was why me? I was not young, I was not from a noble family, I had no political value as an alliance. My father was an archivist, a clerk in the court's view, and my mother was a woman who no longer remembered her own name.
Why would the seer call for me? Unless the seer already knew what I had found in that archive, unless this was not a selection at all, it was silencing. I met him on the 3rd morning, not in a throne room, not at court, not surrounded by ceremony and silk and the performance of power that I had braced myself for. I met Darian Ashe in the palace library at dawn, where he stood at a tall reading table with ink-stained fingers and a look on his face that people get when a problem has kept them awake for too long. He glanced up when I entered. "You're early," he said. I didn't sleep. He gestured at the chair across the table. I sat. He returned to his document. I studied him the way my mother had taught me to study everything. He was younger than the stories suggested, perhaps 30. His face was lean and angular, the kind of face that would be called severe by someone who feared him and striking by someone who didn't. His hands were, as I noticed, genuinely ink-stained, not decoratively, but in the way of someone who writes in volume and in haste. He wore no crown, no court dress, only a dark tunic and riding trousers, and his bearing had none of the performative stillness of power. He looked like a man trying to solve something. I found this deeply suspicious. "You've been reading the selection records," he said without looking up. My chest tightened. "I haven't." "You've been trying to." He turned a page.
Nadia reported that you spent your first morning asking her questions she wasn't authorized to answer. I was curious. About what specifically? About what happened to the women before me. He went still. Not frozen, still. The way a person goes still when a word lands somewhere it wasn't supposed to reach. They completed their duty. That's not an answer. He looked up then, and I saw it. The thing beneath the king's face. The thing that lived under the composed surface like a current under still water. It wasn't cruelty. I had expected cruelty. I had prepared for cruelty. It was exhausting. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time. No, he said quietly, it isn't. He returned to his documents, and we sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling, the mountains still outside. Why me? I asked. The seer called your name. Why did the seer call my name? A pause. That is not a question I can answer this morning. I looked at the documents on his table. They were not administrative records. They were old, the paper yellowed, the handwriting archaic. I could read titles upside down, another of my father's habits. The Covenant of the Black Moon, binding terms, year of the third king. My pulse quickened. What are you researching? He covered the documents with his forearm, a gesture that answered the question more clearly than words could. You should eat breakfast. The court presentation is tomorrow. I stood to leave. At the door, I paused. My father's name was Kofi Osei. He worked in the Royal Archives for 16 years. He disappeared the winter I was 12. I watched the back of his neck. Did you know him? A very long silence. I know of him, Darian said. I left before my voice could betray me. That afternoon, Nadia showed me the talus. I was looking for exits. I was also, against every instinct I had, looking for him, watching for signs of the man who appeared in the library. But the king I glimpsed in the corridors afterwards was different, composed, cool, surrounded by advisors, his face closed to everything that had opened briefly at the reading table. 2 faces, 1 man. I filed that away and kept walking. On the 4th night, I found the passage. It was behind a false wall in the lower corridor of the East Tower, behind a tapestry depicting the first Black Moon King. The mechanism was a loose stone at hip height, the kind of thing only revealed by accident or by the sort of obsessive spatial attention my father had drilled into me from childhood. The passage led downward. I did not follow it that night, but I memorized where it was.
The court presentation came and went in a blur of silk and scrutiny. Nobles assessed me with the practiced efficiency of people evaluating livestock, noting age, bearing, expression, the quality of my composure under collective judgment. I gave them nothing to read, which I suspect was itself a kind of reading. The king sat on his throne and watched me cross the hall with an expression I could not name. Not the warm-eyed exhaustion from the library, not the sealed-off authority from the corridors. Something caught between the two, something unresolved. When I stopped before the throne and the court herald spoke the formal words of welcome, Darian Ashe looked at me and said, very quietly beneath the ceremony, "You walked steadily." "I'm always steady," I replied, just as quietly. "That's either courage or performance. Most things are both." The faintest shift at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, not quite not. 3 nights after the presentation, I went through the passage. It descended through the mountain rock in a tight spiral, lit at intervals by iron brackets holding glow moss, the kind that didn't need flame, only dampness. The walls were smooth, worked by hand over years. This was not a servant's tunnel. It was older, much older. At the bottom, a chamber.
It was perhaps the size of a large room, its walls covered floor to ceiling in shelved stone niches, each containing a sealed clay vessel the size of a small jar. Hundreds of them, thousands perhaps. And on each vessel, scratched into the clay in small, careful letters, a name, a date, and 2 words repeated across all of them, uniform, inexorable. Memory extracted. I stood in that chamber for a long time. I understood in pieces, then all at once, the way terrible things are always understood. The Black Moon Covenant, the seer's selection, the 12 brides in 12 years, none of them had been killed, none of them had completed any sacred duty. They had been emptied, their memories stripped out, sealed in clay, stored in this mountain, just like my mother, except my mother had survived. My mother had walked away, broken and blank, and lived. The others had not been so fortunate. Memory is not a decorative thing, it is structural. Take enough of it and the person collapses inward, the architecture of self falling into the space where it used to live. 11 women, 11 sets of memories, sealed in clay and shelved in darkness. But why? I moved along the shelves, reading names, reading dates, until I found the section that made my legs stop working. The vessels were older here, the clay is darker, the dates went back 30 years, 40, 50, and the names, I began to recognize them. Ministers, judges, scholars, the archivist who had exposed border fraud in the king's grandfather's time, the general who refused to march on the eastern villages, the physician who had written a public letter questioning the covenant's ethics. All of them had simply faded, become confused, docile. All of them were dismissed from their positions, institutionalized, or quietly disappeared. Their careers ended by memory loss. The covenant wasn't a sacred rite, it wasn't a curse the king was managing. The memory extraction was a political tool. Anyone who knew too much, who remembered too much, who threatened the throne, the seer's visions conveniently selected, or had them brought in under some other pretense, and in this chamber their threat was neutralized. My father had been an archivist for 16 years. My father knew exactly what was in these sealed documents. I found his vessel in the second to last row, Kofi Osei, 16 years ago. I picked it up with hands I forced to remain steady, and I carried it to the light. "Put it down." His voice came from the doorway. I turned. Darian Ashe stood at the entrance of the chamber, no guards with him, no armor, only a torch. His face was unreadable in the way that tells you a person is reading everything. "You know what this place is," I said. "Yes." "You know what these are." "Yes."
My father. Yes. His voice broke on the word, just barely, just enough. I stared at him. "How long have you known?" He came into the chamber slowly, as if the space required a certain careful movement. He looked at the walls, at the shelves, at the thousands of sealed vessels, and his expression held something I had not expected to see on the face of the Black Moon King. Grief. "I discovered this 4 years ago," he said, "when I was trying to understand why my own mother had been selected by my grandfather's seer." He stopped beside me. "Before I was born." The silence stretched between us, charged and fragile. "I didn't do this," I said slowly. "No, but I inherited it." His jaw tightened. "And I haven't stopped it, which makes me complicit." "Yes." I looked down at my father's vessel in my hands. "Why are you still selecting women if you—" "Because I don't know how to stop it without understanding it. The covenant is real, that much is true. There is something anchored beneath this mountain that the extraction feeds, something old and structural to the kingdom's stability, or at least that is what every record I've found claims." He looked at me directly.
I've been trying to find the original covenant documents for 3 years, the ones that would tell me what was actually promised and what can be undone. My chest went cold. The documents I had found in the archive, the ones pressed against my ribs in the basement, the ones I had carried into this palace hidden against my body, the ones that were still in my room sewn into the lining of my traveling coat. I told him. Not immediately, not easily. I made him sit across from me in that chamber of stolen memories with my father's vessel between us on the floor, and I made him answer every question I had been holding for 12 years, about my father, about my mother, about the selection, about the 11 women, about what the seer was, and what she actually saw, and how much of it she chose to see. He answered all of them. Some answers broke things in me. Some answers meant things I had not known were broken. The worst answer and the best answer were the same one. My father had not been selected. He had been brought in under a false assessment of treason, a planted document, a conspiracy by the old minister who wanted his archives position. The minister had used the seer's access. Darian's grandfather had not ordered it directly. He had simply not asked what was happening in the chamber beneath his palace. Ignorance is its own kind of order, Darian said. Yes, and you've been practicing it too. He did not argue. I went and got the documents. We spread them across the library table the next morning, the original covenant, written in the hand of the first Black Moon King in a language that was half archaic script and half something older than writing, symbols pressed into the page with a stylus rather than drawn. Darian read the archaic portions, I worked the symbols, cross-referencing against the architectural records I had studied in the archive. What we found was not what either of us expected. The covenant had not promised a yearly sacrifice. It had not promised memory extraction. It had not, in any of its original terms, required women to be emptied and stored in clay. What it had promised was witness, one keeper of truth for each generation, someone who would hold the full memory of the kingdom's history, unfiltered and complete, a living record. In exchange, the mountain's ancient anchor, the force that stabilized the valley against the geological violence of the peaks around it, would remain bound. The first seer had turned that into extraction, control. She'd decided it was easier to take memories than to keep them, easier to store truth in clay than to trust it in a human mind that might speak. The covenant had been corrupted within 1 generation, and no one had read the original terms since. It doesn't require their deaths, Darian said, his voice barely above a whisper. It doesn't require any of it. It requires a keeper, I said, one person who remembers everything. We looked at each other across the table. I thought of my mother by the window, smiling at strangers. I thought of 11 women on 11 shelves. I thought of my father's vessel on the chamber floor. I thought of every memory this palace had swallowed and stored in the dark, away from the light and the living world where it belonged. I'll do it. Zara, not as a sacrifice, not as a selected, as a choice. I met his eyes. The covenant requires a witness. I'll be the witness. I'll take the memories back, all of them, and hold them. He stared at me. All of them? He stopped. That could break you. Or it could make me the most dangerous person in this kingdom, which is what I was already trying to be. The ritual took 3 days to prepare and 3 hours to perform. The seer, old white-eyed Merit, who had served 3 kings and performed every extraction, refused at first. Then Darian showed her the original covenant terms, and something ancient moved across her face. Shame, I thought, or recognition. Perhaps they were the same. She performed the reversal.
I will not describe what it felt like to receive 11 lifetimes of memory in a single night, except to say this. It was not like filling a cup. It was like becoming a river. Everything came in all at once, the fear and the love and the knowledge and the small private griefs and the large public ones, and the things people carry without knowing they are carrying them. 11 women's entire interior worlds flooding into mine. I did not break. My father's archivist mind had spent 12 years training me to hold more than I thought I could hold. I held them all. When it was done, I lay on the chamber floor for a long time with Darian sitting beside me, not touching, not speaking, only present. The mountain outside was quiet. The wind had dropped. After a while, he said, "Are you still you?" I thought about it carefully. "I'm me," I said, "and I'm also them, but they're not lost anymore." He let out a breath, long, ragged, the sound of something set down after years of being carried. The vessels were empty. The chamber was still. Somewhere deep in the mountain the anchor held, fed not by grief and erasure, but by the thing the original covenant had actually asked for: memory, living and kept. In the weeks that followed, things changed in the way that real changes happen, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, irreversible increments. The seer's selection was dissolved, the extraction rights were formally ended by royal decree, and the decree was posted in every ward of every city so that the knowledge of it could not be quietly undone. Darian opened the palace archive to public scholars for the first time in 60 years. He recalled the last 3 selections who had survived their extractions and were living blankly in outer villages, and brought them to healers. Not all of them could be fully restored. Some damage does not reverse. But they were seen. They were named. They were no longer the palace's secret. One morning, I stood at the library window watching the courtyard below, where Darian was speaking to a delegation from the eastern villages, his posture still carrying that quality of command, but his face, even from a distance, open in a way I hadn't seen it in the first days. The sealed thing in him had cracked. He was letting the light in slowly, the way people do when they have spent a long time deciding whether they deserve it. Nadia appeared at my elbow. "He slept last night," she said, with the tone of someone reporting a minor miracle. "First full night in 6 months." I turned back to the window. I still carried 11 women inside me, their memories living alongside mine. Some mornings I woke and it took a moment to locate myself, to find Zara Osei among the chorus of others, but I was always there, and so were they. I had gone to the palace to destroy a king, and found instead the truth that his crown was hiding. I had gone looking for a monster, and found a man buried under the weight of a corruption older than himself. I had gone expecting to die, and discovered something far more difficult and far more necessary: the work of staying. The documents were in the public archive now, transcribed and annotated and accessible to anyone with the patience to read old handwriting. My father's name was on the official record of wrongful extraction, with a formal acknowledgement from the crown. My mother would never recover her memories. The reversal could not reach her. Too many years had passed, too much had collapsed. But she had been moved from the institution to a quiet house near the sea, with a garden and staff who called her by her name, and never made her feel like a stranger in her own life. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was true, and it was done. On the last night of the winter season, I sat on the East Tower balcony, where Darian found me staring at the black moon hanging low and enormous over the mountains. "You should be at the council dinner," he said. "You should let me skip the council dinner." He leaned on the railing beside me, not close, not far. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about something one of them knew, one of the women I carry. She used to watch the moon from her village and tell her children that the dark in the moon wasn't emptiness. She said it was the part of the sky that was listening." He was quiet for a moment. "Was she right?" "I don't know, but I think the listening matters regardless." The wind moved through the mountain cold and clean. Below us, the kingdom of Ashenfall breathed in its sleep, wounded, complicated, beginning slowly to heal. I had come here with documents sewn into my coat and revenge sewn into my chest. I had not burned the king down. I had done something harder. I stayed and demanded the truth. And the truth, it turned out, was not a weapon. It was an anchor.
In the years that followed, the people of Ashenfall told a different story than the one their grandparents knew, not of a great selection or a sacred duty, but of an archivist's daughter who walked into a palace carrying stolen documents and walked out carrying something far heavier, every stolen life the mountain had ever swallowed, held safe in one woman's memory, spoken aloud so that none of it could ever be sealed away again. They called her the Keeper. She preferred Zara, but she answered to both.